Nobody heard anything from Sarah. She just completely vanished, and that's when the alarm bells really started ringing.
I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, because all I was thinking about was, where is my sister? What's happened to my sister? Is she okay?
Sarah hadn't been seen for a number of days, and this was investigated as a high-risk missing person.
I knew then that it was very serious and Sarah was either hurt or dead.
I received a phone call from the officers on the ground to say that they had located a body.
Not somewhere that people would have accidentally stumbled across this body. It was designed to be well hidden. They were the actions of somebody who knew exactly what they were doing.
Of the River Erewash in Derbyshire lies the small town of Ilkeston.
Ilkeston's a mining community. Everyone knows everyone. So when you speak to people on the street, they are just perfectly friendly and they're quite happy to help.
Ilkeston has a very strong sense of belonging, and generation after generation of families stay in the area.
You've got nice woodland areas where you can go and have a walk. You've got like a hilltop thing where you can sit and you can look out over the fields, which is quite a nice view.
And the countryside's really accessible. In fact, like, I can just walk out my flat, go a few minutes, and I can be walking down the canal. It's a beautiful, beautiful area.
You go in a cafe, even if you don't know people in there, within seconds, you know, it's like you've known each other for years. You know, it's a lovely place.
And everybody helps one another, especially in times of need. I've always said there is nowhere else that I've ever been where the community spirit is like it is here.
Ilkeston is the town where 31-year-old Sarah Henshaw chose to raise her 2 children.
Sarah was a much-loved family member and friend within the community.
She was a full-time care assistant, going around the community, helping, looking after old people, yeah.
Everybody knew Sarah. She always helped people out whenever she had the chance, like helping neighbours in with their shopping. She always helped everybody out.
So when nobody has seen Sarah for a few days, her family start to feel uneasy.
I'd not seen her around. I normally see her go past in my car, or she would come to mine. I'd not seen her. I'd not heard from her.
My mum had rang me up to say, keep an eye out for Sarah. She'd rang around, she said she'd rang around everybody she could possibly think of who knew Sarah and where she would be. Nobody had no idea where Sarah was. And then I said, Mum, do you think it's serious? And she said, no, I think she's just gone away for a couple of days. But I said, Mum, Sarah wouldn't even do that. She wouldn't go without the girls.
Police were made aware that Sarah hadn't been seen for a number of days, and that was on Friday, the 23rd of June. And this was investigated as a high-risk missing person, and that was as a result of speaking to family members and friends and coming to the conclusion that this was completely out of character for Sarah to be incommunicado with people very close to her.
When Sarah's family realised that she has not taken her car, their fears escalate.
3 things she never, ever, ever goes out the house with ever: a kid, a phone and a car. She won't walk down the street only if her car's broke down or if it's got problems, or she'll be in a car. Anywhere she goes, she'll be in a car.
She'd been assaulted by somebody unknown to her a few years before, which caused her to drive everywhere in her car. She never went anywhere on foot, very rarely.
I said to my mum, Mum, something's not right here. It's not normal for Sarah to go without a car, to leave the keys, to leave the kids. I knew then that it was very serious and Sarah was either hurt or dead.
Police need to look into Sarah's life to see if anything can explain her disappearance.
It was a bit hectic and crazy growing up as a big family because there was 6 of us as siblings in a little house. Sarah always looked out for me. Sarah wanted me to grow up and be a young woman with respect. That's one thing Sarah always said to me, is you need self-respect. And she always taught me to say my please and thank yous all the time, reminded me.
Sarah was the main one of the family, and they all looked up to her. And if their siblings needed anything, she'd be there straight away. If anyone upset members of her family, she'd tell them straight. She was a joker as well, like bubbly and joking. You don't know what to expect from her.
Laughing. Was always laughing. Always. Or she, you know, just the way she was. She was so caring, always there for everybody. And I just love laughing with her. She was just so funny, always telling jokes.
But yeah, she was just mad. Good mad, like, not bad mad, but yeah. We just was a bit nutty together, to be honest. She was good to me and I was good to her.
Sarah loved to have independence. That's all she did. She was a very independent, strong woman, and everybody knew her for that. She didn't like to be seen struggling. She didn't like to ask for help. She did it all by herself.
There was nothing significant that stood out regarding Sarah. Her main priority, quite obviously, were her 2 girls and her dog, and creating a home life that was happy and fun. She was clearly well-loved, friendly, vivacious young woman who had the whole of her life in front of her.
When we first found out Sarah was missing, family members were contacting all of her friends, anybody who could link to Sarah, who could have seen her, and nobody had. We all was just constantly ringing her phone, hoping she'd turn it on for 5 minutes and maybe reply to one of us, but calls were going to answer phone, messages were going, not sending. During the days Sarah was missing and the police were aware of it all and the investigation was ongoing, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, because all I was thinking about was, where is my sister? What's happened to my sister? Is she okay?
As police inquiries continue, concern for Sarah's welfare grows.
What we noted was that Sarah was constantly messaging people, friends, family. So the fact that there was no phone usage was a huge red flag to the police. Nobody heard anything from Sarah. She just completely vanished. And that's when the alarm bells really started ringing. She was not caught on CCTV anywhere. CCTV covers a huge amount of space now. Ring doorbell footage. Her car was where it was, so how had she disappeared without being caught on any of those items of media?
There were real concerns for Sarah's safety. My main aim and focus was to find Sarah Henshaw. Police forced entry into her home address in an effort to find her. Clearly Sarah wasn't there, but there were signs in the kitchen that there possibly had been a clean-up. There was mop and bucket and bleach.
So I ran up to her house and there was a police officer there, and I went, "Is Sarah there?" And he went, "No, she's not in the house." And I said, "Well, can I go in and check?" He goes, "We've already checked, she's not there." I goes, "Something's happened to her, it don't feel right." I says, "She's either hurt somewhere or she's lying somewhere really bad." I says, "I've got this feeling."
As search teams scour Sarah's house, they make another alarming discovery.
Sarah always wore a necklace with an elephant charm on it.
It was of great sentimental value to her, and we found it broken in different parts of the house. That raised the concerns for Sarah's well-being and whether we would actually find her alive.
In Ilkeston, Derbyshire, police have deemed 31-year-old Sarah Henshaw a high-risk missing person. In Sarah's home, search teams have found fragments of her broken necklace, along with signs of a clean-up.
So there were 23 exhibits seized from Sarah's home address, including mobile phones, laptops, clothing, but also some blue tarpaulin that we took possession of.
Tracing Sarah's last known movements, detectives make an unsettling discovery. The last time she was caught on CCTV was a full 3 days previously.
It became apparent that her last known sighting, last proof of life, was Tuesday the 20th of June, when she was seen on CCTV entering a local shop.
At 6:30, she purchased some groceries. She was fit, she was well, she didn't present us with any concerns when she was in the store.
Police released these images of Sarah on social media in an appeal to the public for information.
Then it had gone on to like Derbyshire Live, and then obviously people sharing it was just going more and more everywhere, you know, around the community.
I remember seeing the missing persons alert, and at that point it started to become clear that the police were getting concerned.
It became apparent during that investigation phase that there were witnesses. A neighbour heard a commotion coming from the property on the evening of the 20th of June.
At around 10 p.m, an argument can be heard coming from Sarah's bedroom, followed by a banging noise and then silence.
So my suspicions were raised, and I was really concerned about Sarah's safety. And this was not just a missing persons inquiry, this was a murder investigation. And that was a result of witnesses who had heard chilling screams coming from Sarah's bedroom on that evening. This then became a no-body murder investigation.
When police speak to Sarah's neighbour Demi, she reveals she also heard noises from Sarah's house on the night of June 20th.
Like a banging on a radiator. It was do-do-do, and it was like, it was a weird sound, so it was either coming from her bedroom or the stairs, the landing. I'd messaged her and put, "Is everything okay?" And as I hold the phone, as soon as it went to her phone, it had been read and replied saying, "Yes, everything okay?" And I just texted back and put, "Okay, that's fine. I thought I could hear something."
A reply was sent from Sarah's phone to say that everything was okay, it was just the dog having a fit. The dog had been known to have fits. That was a condition that their dog had suffered with.
And I just thought it was the dog, so with the reply that I got off Sarah saying, "Yes, everything's okay," I've gone back to sleep.
Then in the early hours, Demi is again disturbed.
I heard something else, so I've looked out of my window and Darren was standing at his van, but he had both of the back doors open. Then he shut the doors and walked in, and then that was it.
As Sarah's former partner, Darren Hall is still a regular visitor, so Demi thinks little more of it until the following morning.
Sarah's friend knocked on Sarah's house, no answer. And she said, "Oh, have you seen Sarah?" And I says, "No, I haven't seen her since the night before." Messaged Darren and I asked him, "Have you seen Sarah?" And he said, the reply that I got is, "No, I don't know where she's gone. She's went out early hours." And I said, "All right, so do you know where she is? She hasn't taken a car." And he said, "No, don't know anything. I'll try and let you know later."
Later that day, Darren tells Demi that he's worried about Sarah and that some of her belongings are missing.
He said, have you been in all day? I said, I have. And he said, do you know if anybody's been in the house? And I said, no. And he said, somebody's been in the house and opened her drawers, taken clothes out, but then she had like a butterfly bag. She loved butterflies, and put, you know, clothes inside this bag, gone out the house and taken it. And I said, no, I've not seen anybody.
Continued to trace Sarah's movements in the hours before she was last caught on CCTV. It becomes apparent that she had spent much of the previous day with a friend.
So Sarah, on that Tuesday, had been out with her best friend all day and had come back in the evening, went to the shop, picked up some items for tea, went back to find that Darren had let himself in with a key that he still had. We now know that Sarah wasn't happy about it and had asked him to return it. We know that the atmosphere was frosty, that Sarah didn't want him there.
There'd been a build-up throughout the day. Sarah was saying to him in no uncertain terms that she didn't want him in her life anymore. She didn't want him at the house. She wanted him to leave his key. We know that throughout that evening that Darren was refusing to go. He wasn't accepting that she didn't want him to be there.
Sarah's best friend said that her and Darren had an argument at the dinner table. It was very chaotic. Darren upsetting Sarah, and obviously Sarah saying, please just get out of my house, I need some time to myself. And she said she knew Sarah was uncomfortable in her own house because Darren was there and wouldn't leave.
We know from CCTV inquiries on Sarah Street that she left her home address to take a friend home. Sarah dropped a friend off and returned back to her home address a couple of minutes later. So Sarah would have been back at her home address just before 10 p.m, 20th of June.
Police inquiries reveal that Darren was still at the house when Sarah returned.
At 22:02 hours, we know that there's a message exchange between Sarah and her best friend. And then Sarah sends a final message from her phone at 10:09, which a friend responds to at 10:37. And that's the message that Sarah would have replied back to. A friend is asking if she's okay. But after that message, there's no contact from Sarah.
It appears that Darren Hall may have been the last person to see Sarah Henshaw alive.
No other persons were coming into the frame as to being responsible for her disappearance other than her ex-partner, who was in the house at that time.
At this point, I'm placing you under arrest for murder. You don't have to say anything, so it may harm your bed. It's not going to much later on in court, and anything you do say might be giving evidence. The reason that you've been arrested, the necessity is so we can do a prompt and effective investigation, and so we don't have any loss of evidence, OK? It's on suspicion of murder at the moment.
Mum of two, Sarah Henshaw, is missing, presumed dead. Her ex-partner, Darren Hall, is believed to be the last person to have seen her alive, and despite police finding no body, he has been arrested on suspicion of her murder.
Sarah's always happy, no matter what, even if things were on her mind, she always stayed happy. She managed to make everybody laugh. Even on our bad days, we'd laugh. We could not stop laughing.
Was he surprised?
Go on, then.
Sarah would do anything for her friends. A very genuine, kind, loving person, and that's not something what can be put on. That is who Sarah was.
She never went out. She preferred staying in and having cuddles and playing pranks on each other. Her home was her safe space.
Police interviewed Darren, They took his phone from him at that point. He maintained in his interview that they'd had an argument and that Sarah had left him.
Darren maintained that he was not responsible for Sarah going missing, that he didn't know where she was, that she had done this before, that she had gone off and left the family home.
Detectives questioned Darren as to why he was in the driveway of Sarah's house in the early hours of the morning on the night they believe she was killed.
Darren was giving it a very convoluted story about the events of that night and the reasons why he left the home in the early hours, citing that the dog had had a fit and messed on a duvet, and he was having to leave the address in the early hours to dispose of this duvet. And I was acutely aware of how hot it was that June and how desperately I wanted to find Sarah for her family. So we were imploring Darren to tell us where she was. Just tell us where she was. And he was quite callous. At one point said to us that it was our job to find her.
Police start to find inconsistencies in Darren's account of that night.
We know Sarah didn't leave the home address, as he stated, due to the CCTV trawls that we were doing. And also it would have been very out of character to walk out of her home address, which is something she never did, particularly in the middle of the night.
Convinced that Darren knows details of Sarah's whereabouts, police fast-track analysis of the phone they seized on his arrest.
So we know Darren Hall's mobile phone was connected to Sarah's home address in the early hours of the 21st of June and disconnected from her home address at 10 to 2 approximately, and then connected up with his Ford Transit van that was parked outside. So following on from that, we then plotted his route using GPS data, ANPR, CCTV, where he had gone in the early hours. We know his route, leaving Ilkeston, joining the M1 at junction 29, and we know that his vehicle became stationary at a lay-by on the A617.
And we know that it was in that lay-by for a total of 9 minutes. And we can say that because Darren Hall's phone was tracked on the same satellite which covered the lay-by for the 9 minutes he was there.
We also know during that time that the torchlight on his phone was turned on and off at intervals.
So every time you turn it on and off, it stamps it, leaves a date and a time as to each activation. We was also able to look at the apps that he'd viewed, the downloads on his mobile phone. The health app was very important because it showed that he was taking hundreds of steps in the early hours of the 21st, which is out of character. The normal activity for Darren between midnight and 6 in the morning is that there's no activity at all. Yet on this particular morning, he's done 266 steps. We were confident that Darren was in the lay-by, so we sent a specialist uniformed task force, a search team down to that lay-by.
And it was some 10 minutes later that I received a phone call from the officers on the ground to say that they had located a body some 10 metres from the lay-by.
The lay-by was heavily overgrown, dense, wooded area. You wouldn't have been able to see the body unless you actually walked into the woods. We only found the body through the location data on Darren's mobile phone.
Upon searching the deposition area, we found small snags of blue tarpaulin on the bramble bushes that were seized and found to match the blue tarpaulin within Sarah's home address. It was quite quickly became apparent that this was the body of Sarah Henshaw.
The Monday they came and told me that they found her. I still sat there thinking she's going to come back.
The first thing I said after my mum said that she was dead was, where is she? Where was she found? And my mum said that he had just dumped her in a lay-by. Sorry. Oh, damn. I'm gonna do it, I just gotta, hang on, sorry, it's because this is the first time I've ever spoken about it. All I wanted was my big sister. I just wanted my big sister to come back and say, I'm okay now, it's fine, stop stressing. And then to get told a week later of the news that I'm never going to get to see her again broke me.
Police tell Darren Hall they have found Sarah's body.
We located Sarah's body just after midnight on Monday, the 26th of June, and the next interview, we told him that we had found her body and where. From that point on, he remained silent.
He completely changed. He closed down, wouldn't answer any further questions, wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't engage with the officers at all, just sat there in silence.
8 days after Sarah Henshaw's death, Darren Hall is charged with her murder.
He maintained that he had no idea where Sarah was or what had happened to her. And when he was confronted with the evidence after they'd found her body, that's when he had no answers.
With so many questions left unanswered, Sarah's mum seeks guidance from a medium.
And she was sending messages that she kept doing this, he said. Kept doing that round her neck. And that she was wrapped in something. She passed a message on to me saying, you deal with the court, get justice.
Then as the court date approaches, Darren Hall breaks his silence.
Darren Hall admitted that he had disposed of Sarah's body. Darren's defence was that Sarah had fallen down the stairs and he had panicked.
What Darren didn't admit is that he was the one who'd killed Sarah.
The body of Sarah Henshaw has been found near a lay-by in Derbyshire. Her ex-partner, Darren Hall, has admitted to concealing her body, but denies her murder.
He just treated her like a bag of rubbish. No, you wouldn't even treat an animal like that. He didn't love her if he was going to do that.
And there were probably around a dozen friends and family members in the court, and they were deeply distressed.
I was nervy, but I sat there and I was so strong. And all my family were there and they were strong.
The courtroom was charged with energy. When Darren was led into the dock,
I just sat looking at him. Thought, you ain't getting the better of me. I'm more stronger than you, mate. And I sat there looking at him.
But Darren Hall cuts a forlorn figure in the dock.
He looked utterly petrified. I didn't know really whether he'd be able to give evidence. He looked that nervous and that distressed.
And it was apparent, looking at Darren, he appeared to be putting on some act to me of a dishevelled, nervous wreck of a man who was being wrongly convicted.
You've got to be quite careful in that situation because you don't want the jury to feel sympathy for somebody. You want to demonstrate what a cold, calculating person he had been.
lay out their case that Sarah had fallen down the stairs in a fatal accident.
He said it happened in a split second. He said he looked at the bottom of the stairs and she was dead. He panicked, didn't want anyone to find out about it and accuse him of murder.
He actually describes Sarah as the one who was pushing him across the landing. If your loved one had fallen down the stairs, the first thing what he'd do is call for an ambulance, and if you can save that person's life, you would do everything in your powers to do that. But Darren didn't do that. If we go back to Darren's interviews, he never mentioned that Sarah had fallen down the stairs. His story is that they'd had an argument and she'd gone to stay at a friend's house. If there was any other innocent explanation, then you would tell the police what had happened. But Darren didn't do that because he couldn't, because there wasn't an innocent explanation for what he'd done. He very coldly murdered her.
But there is a gaping hole in the prosecution's case.
What we didn't have was an eyewitness as to what actually took place. We had people who heard things. One witness heard a scream, another heard banging.
The prosecution offer up a theory as to Darren's motive for killing Sarah.
Sarah was going to expose Darren on social media about an affair that she believed that he had had. Those messages would have been present on Sarah's phone, so he needed to get rid of that phone because it gives a motive for him to kill her.
Police believe that Darren Hall disposed of Sarah's phone the day after he left her body in the lay-by.
On his return to Ilkeston, we know he pulled into a lake. He stops and his phone disconnects from his van for 30 seconds. He then gets back in his van and continues home. My thoughts are, why, on your way home, would you stop at a lake for just 30 seconds? My belief was that this is where he threw Sarah's phone. That lake was searched tirelessly by dive officers, but Sarah's phone was never found.
The prosecution revealed disturbing details of Darren and Sarah's relationship.
So Darren and Sarah had been together for approximately 12, 13 years, a very volatile on-off relationship.
If Sarah was going through a bad time with anything, he had no sympathy. He didn't show that, and he didn't show no love, none whatsoever.
It was little petty arguments at first, but the voices would get louder and louder, and then it wouldn't be a petty argument anymore. It would be over the silliest thing. Maybe she's nipped to the shop and she's been longer than what she thought she'd be, and then it'd be questions after questions. And she said, "I feel like I'm stepping on eggshells around you, Darren." And she had bruises on her arms and on her face. And I said, "Sarah, how did you get them?" And she said, "Oh, I fell down the stairs." But I knew that straight away she can't just get marks and a black eye from falling down the stairs. And later on, my mum had told me it was from Darren.
He hurt her when she was pregnant. He pushed her. And obviously Sarah said, "Don't say it, Mum." I warned her to ring someone then, but she wouldn't. She just said, "I love him, Mum, and I want to be with him." And I says, "If that's what you want, I can't stop you."
But this evidence is entirely circumstantial.
We're aware there were incidents of domestic abuse, however, none of which, unfortunately, being reported to the police.
And Darren is visibly distraught, claiming that he adored Sarah.
And his case was that their relationship was brilliant at the beginning. It had its difficulties, but he really wanted to make it work.
The analysis of both Darren and Sarah's phone data that is laid out for the jury reveals some disturbing evidence.
Messages were sent in response to her friends questioning her about is she okay because of the lack of contact.
The texts from Sarah Henshaw's phone were then matched, of course, time-wise with when Darren Hall dumped her body in the lay-by.
We now know that that would be Darren Hall re-messaging those friends back, purporting to be Sarah. We believe at that time that Sarah was dead.
And I think most upsettingly, but crucially, he had been sending a number of messages to Sarah's phone, effectively saying, "Where are you? I miss you. Please come home."
The fact that he was sending messages from his phone to Sarah's phone, it was a very considered and convoluted way of disguising the fact that he had killed her.
And there is further incriminating evidence obtained from Darren Hall's phone when police look at searches he has made in the days following Sarah's death.
Darren makes 2 Google searches. The first one looking into police procedures for missing persons, and the second one is can deleted messages be recovered from an iPhone. We know that Darren searches how to change over child tax benefit. It just shows something very sinister, don't it?
Phone data reveals that despite his story to neighbour Demi, it was not Sarah that had taken a bag of her belongings, but Darren Hall himself.
I think the most shocking part of the trial was the fact that he'd gone back to the family home and snuck in to pack this bag to then further perpetuate the lie that Sarah had left her family. To think about that, to think about doing that, showed a man who knew exactly what he was doing and was doing everything in his power to avoid being caught.
He removed a number of items of clothing and packed them in a butterfly duffel bag that belonged to Sarah. We then know that Darren left Sarah's after 10 minutes, and from his phone location data we know that he went directly to Ilkeston Skip. He drives around to where the clothing bank is, parks up, and he removes 2 black bags from his van and disposes of them into the clothing bank.
And it became apparent that Darren had got rid of evidence that may have implicated him in the disappearance of Sarah.
Unfortunately, by the time the police discovered the CCTV of that, the recycling bin had been emptied, and so we were never able to show what had been disposed of.
However, we continued on with his movements of that day. Later that day, he'd also visited a recycling centre in Nottingham with his work colleague. He'd distracted his work colleague to empty the back of the van whilst he went to the side of the van and took out 2 white plastic bags. That skip was seized, and specialist search teams conducted a meticulous search through the items of that skip.
There was a box with Darren's address on it, which enabled us to link that bag to Darren, and then underneath that box, Sarah's dressing gown cord and the slippers.
And that enabled us to put forward the case theory that actually he had strangled her using the dressing gown cord. The question we put before the jury was, why would he get rid of that dressing gown? What was so significant about it that he felt the need to dispose of it? And he hadn't done this on just one day. He'd done this over the course of 2 or 3 days. And that was crucial because it showed that this wasn't a man who was panicking. Actually, it showed that he was thinking about his actions and very carefully disposing of items in different, separate locations in an effort to thwart the police investigation.
But Sarah's post-mortem does not corroborate the theory that she was strangled.
Sarah's body, it had begun to decompose. So the normal types of injuries that we look for and what we thought was a strangulation case would be bruising around the neck. And we couldn't see that because the skin was so discoloured.
Darren maintains that Sarah's death was as a result of her falling downstairs.
There were no bony injuries, so no bruises or abrasions on parts of the body that, if you'd fallen down the stairs, that's where you would expect there to be injuries. We were able to show that, or the lack of injury showed that that was not consistent with his account. Put that together with the screams that were heard, and we said that ultimately he had murdered her.
But the defence are quick to point out that Sarah's cause of death is unknown.
The two doctors that I saw give evidence both said we can't conclude definitively how this person died because of the state of decomposition.
With all the evidence now presented, it is a nervous wait for the jury's decision.
There was the concern that Darren Hall was going to wriggle out of this and the jury would accept his explanation.
There's always an element of risk with any trial, particularly in this case when we couldn't definitively say how Sarah had died.
Having deliberated for just 3 hours, the jury returns.
There's a lot of trepidation in anticipation for what that verdict is going to be. The stress is palpable. And you could hear a pin drop when the verdict is heard. Guilty. The verdict was unanimous decision of guilty for murder.
We all screamed yes so loud, and we all looked at Darren, and Darren's face just went down and he just did that.
My body just drained, or the drain feeling. And I went up to the prosecution barrister and gave her a hug and said thank you.
The sentence was life. The minimum term was 17 years. Now that means that Darren Hall will have to serve at least 17 years before he's considered eligible for parole.
Darren Hall is manipulative, deceiving, and a violent individual. So as a result of his continued lies and deceitful way in which he disposed of Sarah's body, he robbed her family of having the opportunity to say goodbye to her.
None of us was able to see Sarah, as they said, because of the heat and the amount of time she was out in the lay-by for, her body had decomposed in some areas.
There's a part of me what's gone. So my heart, a part of my heart's ripped out.
The life sentence. We're never going to sit and have a cup of tea with Sarah ever again. I'm never going to get to see my big sister ever again.
That this programme contains themes of domestic violence.
The police received a call. Dawn Walker had gone missing. She had never gone missing before. This was an extraordinary absence.
The neighbours told of hearing screams and banging. Dawn seemed scared of something. She told her daughter, "I feel like something bad is going to happen to me."
She was an inveterate liar. Everything was a fabrication. And the whole picture became clear. He was somebody who was totally intent on protecting himself.
The truth was actually worse. It was chilling.
Of Halifax in West Yorkshire lies the charming village of Lightcliffe.
It's a nice, close-knit community. It's friendly. Everyone knows the neighbours. It's quite residential, family-orientated.
So I've lived in Lightcliffe for around 4 or 5 years, and my wife's lived here all her life. It's just a very nice feel, close to everywhere you want to be, near to Leeds, near Huddersfield. It's just got everything that you want. So I'd say it's very much a place where people would move to, so it's definitely a sought-after place to want to live, yeah. It's very much a place where, you know, if you're walking down the road, and you see someone even in the car or walking, you say hello and you even stop and have a natter with them.
It is Lightcliff, where Dawn Walker and Thomas Nutt decide to settle down together.
Dawn and Thomas met in 2019 and formed a very strong relationship. Dawn Walker, aged 52, is the mother of 3 children. He was a little bit younger than she was. Thomas, aged 45, was a scrap metal dealer, very friendly chap when he dealt with persons in the street or neighbours or anything of that nature. He was one of the boys, we'll say.
I understand that he and Dawn had met through Facebook.
They moved in together and were living in the current house for about 2 years. They had a pretty stable, happy-go-lucky relationship, and they were going to be married.
Thomas and Dawn had been together for 3 years, and then they married on the 27th of October.
Dawn and Thomas got married in Brigg House, and they had a party in the local pub that evening. And in fact, it was a happy affair with about 20 people present.
And they were in good spirits. They had planned the next day to go to Skegness.
There was a plan to go on honeymoon after the marriage, and the arrangement was they would go in the caravan, which Thomas owned. Day after the couple went on their honeymoon, the daughters of Dawn received messages from her about what was going on, that they were having a good time.
Dawn mentions to her daughter that she'd like to get together when she gets back from her honeymoon.
Arrangements were made for her to meet her when they returned home and to go shopping together in Wilco's in Brigg House.
Despite Dawn's cheery message to her daughters, Thomas divulges that he and his new bride had had a difference of opinion.
During the honeymoon, Thomas messaged a neighbour saying that him and Dawn had a disagreement about when to return home. He claimed he wanted to return home for Halloween for her grandson, and she was not happy, and he also texted a neighbour to say that he had to please the wife.
After their 4-day honeymoon, the couple arrived back in Lightcliff on the morning of the 31st of October.
It was on Halloween morning that Thomas was in his garden putting up Halloween decorations, which even included police tape.
Thomas is going to town on the Halloween decorations when a neighbour asks after Dawn.
It was then that Thomas told the neighbour that Dawn had not turned up to meet her daughter in Brigg House.
Dawn was due to meet up with one of her daughters and her grandson, and she didn't turn up. And this was highly unusual for her, because she loved her grandson and she loved her daughter.
The neighbour had joked, "Where have you buried her, Tomo?" And Thomas began to cry and became emotional at the question, despite it clearly being a joke.
Thomas then admits that despite having just returned from a happy honeymoon, Dawn had left the house a few hours earlier, and he'd not seen her since, prompting the neighbour to rally the community.
A search was put in hand as a result of the concerns over Dawn's absence, and this was done by neighbours and friends of Thomas.
When the search fails to locate Dawn, Thomas alerts the police to her uncharacteristic disappearance.
The police received a call from Thomas Nutt at 12:30, reporting his newly wedded wife, Dawn Walker, had gone missing from the family home. So police received that report and assessed it as high risk.
4 days after the wedding, Dawn was declared missing.
Despite the fact that Dawn has only been reported missing for a few hours, police are concerned for her safety and try to determine if there's an explanation for her absence.
Dawn was a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 1.
We know from the information from her daughters that she was a very kind, selfless person, and was only 5 foot tall and very slight build. And she was a mother, she was a sister, she was an aunt, and she was a friend. She would do anything for anyone.
With fears for Dawn's well-being growing, a police officer is sent to Dawn and Thomas's home.
The officer went round on the 31st of October. We know that they expedited to the address to get as much information as possible.
Despite having arranged to speak with Thomas, when the officer arrives, there appears to be nobody home. Then a few minutes later, Thomas appears.
Thomas Nutt told the officer that he'd actually been to the shop. The police officer noted that Thomas Nutt was sweating at the time.
Thomas explains he'd nipped out and, realising the time, had rushed home to meet the police officer.
And that was one of the reasons why Thomas said he was sweating, because he was running. When the police officer carried out the initial inquiry with Thomas Nutt, he spent over an hour with him. Thomas told the police officer that his wife, Dawn, was a little bit agitated because of her mental condition.
A concerned Thomas discloses to the police officer that he believes that Dawn had been failing to take her medication.
He was concerned because he said that Dawn suffered from bipolar and depression.
When the police officer leaves, Thomas calls upon a neighbour to help him resume the search for Dawn. They go to a graveyard where the couple would often walk.
He had taken a neighbour with him to look for Dawn at a cemetery, and he said he was glad that he had taken this neighbour with him in case people thought he had killed Dawn.
Meanwhile, friends and neighbours continue to search for Dawn closer to home and come across an unexpected discovery.
They went and looked in fields and bushes behind the property, and they found a suitcase in the bushes close by to the back of Thomas and Dawn's home.
Woman saw the suitcase in the area that had been left. It was her partner that had gone looking for Dawn with Thomas, and upon their return, she let him know of her concerns. And that's when he went and discovered the body in the suitcase.
And the body was identified as that of Dawn.
Lightcliffe, West Yorkshire. 4 days after her wedding to Thomas Nutt, locals have been searching for his missing bride, Dawn Walker.
And the search ended with the discovery of a suitcase in the bushes, and that suitcase contained a body. And the body was eventually identified as that of Dawn.
Halloween, I mean, at first you think it's a joke, and then the more people talk about it, and then when it did come about that, you know, there was a body there, that's when you just think, wow, it's really serious sort of stuff, you know?
This was clearly not a missing persons case. It was a murder investigation. And the police set about dealing with it as best they could, as quickly as they could.
Detectives scrutinised Dawn's movements in the days leading up to her disappearance. Since Dawn and Thomas had been out of town on honeymoon, neighbours report last seeing Dawn at her wedding reception.
Dawn and Tommy left the party at 10:20 or thereabouts, picked up by a taxi and taken home. It took 6 minutes to get back to their home. And they alighted from the taxi and went into the house. The police contacted the taxi driver after the event, and he confirmed that there appeared to be a happy atmosphere in the taxi after he picked them up. Obviously they had been drinking, but there seemed to be a good, happy relationship.
We know Dawn arrived back home on their wedding night. She was spotted on CCTV. It was just after midnight that Thomas Nutt was seen leaving the house again.
He was seen actually going to a cash point, and as he went up to the cash point, he pulled up his hoodie so he couldn't actually be seen facially, and he drew out £200 cash from that cash point. That was drawn out on Dawn's card.
At 1 a.m, he was spotted in the family's back garden, and then at 5:30 a.m, he was observed by a neighbour having a cigarette on the back step as well.
As police look more closely at Dawn's new husband, a worrying picture starts to emerge.
Thomas Nutt had been violent towards a previous partner who had become controlling with, not letting her leave the house. In July 2020, Dawn had actually messaged the ex-partner of Thomas Nutt's to find out why she had a restraining order put in against him. Nutt had claimed that it was because the woman had cheated on him, but the truth was actually very horrific. The relationship Thomas Nutt had with the woman was marred by violence.
So this is an individual who is using their physique and their physical dominance to dominate and impose their will by means of verbal abuse and physical abuse.
She actually made Dawn aware of Thomas's behaviour patterns, and she actually had a Facebook dialogue with Dawn, trying to warn her about Thomas's conduct and behaviour. Notwithstanding that, Dawn did stick with the man she loved.
The woman then received a message from Dawn in August 21. Dawn said that Nutt had tried to kill her and had bruised her face and tried to suffocate her, but panicked when he saw all the blood.
Dawn's friends and family paint a sinister picture of her new husband, Thomas Nutt.
By all reports, they had a relationship which was abusive. Family members will say that he was controlling. We know that the family were isolated from Dawn, and that Nutt led Dawn to believe that he was the only person that she needed, her protector, her husband, and that she did not need any other relationships. That is completely the modus operandi of a domestic violence perpetrator.
As a result of the investigations made by the police, it became clear that Thomas Nutt was a very possessive man, and he was very, very jealous of Dawn, and he controlled her. He was coercive in his general behaviour towards her. He wanted his own way, and if he didn't get it, it would seem he resorted to violence.
They've had previous domestic history in the past. One neighbour says they heard Tomo get off me.
And neighbours told of hearing screams and banging before.
One of the neighbours went to the house and banged on the door because he could hear screaming that he'd never heard from a lady before. That level of screaming. And Thomas answered the door and said, "Oh, she's not well. Hasn't taken her pills again."
A neighbour had walked into the house and discovered Nutt assaulting Dawn, and she'd complained that he was going to kill her. Dawn was seen in 2020 with having injuries including a black eye, and it's understood in the days up to her wedding she also messaged a neighbour asking if she should get the hell out of there. On her wedding day, Dawn had even been seen by her daughter shaking and looked to be unhappy. She told her, "I feel like something bad is going to happen." On what was supposed to be her happiest day of her life, Dawn seemed scared of something. Her daughter told her that she was just being paranoid, but she again repeated, "I feel something bad is going to happen to me." The two then left things as they were and continued to prepare for the day.
police systems tell us that there has been reports of domestic violence. Only 12 months ago, Dawn Walker took the courageous step in reporting Nutt for domestic abuse towards her. We know that this led to the police and Crown Prosecution Service not only charging Nutt but also remanding Nutt. Usually when somebody is remanded in custody, they pose a threat to other people. So that was a real courageous step that Dawn took, and she wouldn't have taken it lightly, but she suffered months and months of abuse prior to that.
Dawn reported Thomas to the police because he beat her up, and she was badly injured facially, and she alleged that he treated her badly sexually.
We know Dawn urged police to drop the charges because Dawn did not want to prosecute, and there wasn't enough independent evidence. The case, it was discontinued. But we don't know if there was any contact between Nutt and Dawn during the period he was incarcerated. But we do know she felt compelled to withdraw those charges.
Eventually, when he was released, he then moved in back with her, and she continued to happily or unhappily live with him.
Because Dawn was in a controlling and coercive relationship, he was then able to wiggle his way into the house and the home and her heart again.
In an unexpected turn of events, detectives are contacted by Thomas Nutt's brief.
It's during this time that officers received a call from a solicitor who had said that a man called Thomas Nutt was going to hand himself into the police station.
He handed himself in to police at Halifax Police Station on the afternoon of the 31st of October, having previously, only hours earlier, reported Dawn missing.
Thomas decided, with some reluctance it would seem, to go to the police station and to give an account of what had happened.
Police are investigating the murder of 52-year-old Dawn Walker. They have discovered that her new husband, Thomas Nutt, has a history of domestic abuse. In a surprise move, he has handed himself into police, keen to give his account of how events unfolded when they returned from their honeymoon.
Nutt claimed that the couple had got back from Skegness after 2 days away, and that Dawn had said that she'd wanted a divorce and was going to report him for rape and assault.
He's saying that she threatened to report him again to police, which then caused him to react.
Thomas said that Dawn attacked him, and he had to defend himself from her, and he struck out to defend himself and also to stop her screaming and making threats, etc. Thomas said that he did not intend to cause any harm, but Dawn became aggressive, and that she attacked him, scratched his face with her long nails.
Nutt claimed that he then hit Dawn in the face and put his arm around her neck, and she went limp. He claimed her death was accidental.
He did admit that he had been involved in violence upon Dawn and was responsible for her death, but it wasn't intentional. It was, as he suggested, accidental. That's what he was pushing forward to the police. And in fact, he did, in his explanation, try and get that over by saying it all happened so quickly and so suddenly, he didn't realise that she was dead until she collapsed.
Thomas Nutt may be claiming his wife's death was accidental, but detectives take a different view.
When Nutt has handed himself into police, he's said that he has killed his wife. He's then arrested for murder.
And there was a lot of talk around the community of, you know, this murder had taken place and how horrific it was. So it was just like quite intriguing at that point as to, you know, what had actually happened.
The family of a woman who was found dead in Halifax on Sunday have paid tribute to her. The body of 52-year-old Dawn Walker was found near Aysgarth Avenue in Lightcliffe. Police have arrested a 45-year-old man and he remains in custody.
And ultimately, when he's interviewed by police, it's a deck of cards then that's fallen down, because once the police have found the body, and the body is obviously met an unnatural death, he becomes a suspect by way of him being the last person that he's seen to see her alive, but also because of the domestic violence history. And he knows that, which has probably led him to go to the police and try and get his point of view forward to the police, even though he's admitted killing her.
Thomas Nutt is charged with the murder of his wife, Dawn Walker. But Nutt remains resolute in his account of her death being unintentional.
He says that it was manslaughter and he didn't mean to kill her.
He pleaded not guilty and the trial date was set.
Thomas admitted manslaughter, that he didn't intend to cause her serious bodily harm, and that although he used force upon her, there was no intent to kill. And that was why the prosecution quite properly said, no, we're not prepared to accept that plea to manslaughter, but went ahead with the trial on the charge of murder. Thomas maintained that he only reacted to Dawn when she lost her temper, she attacked him, and he had to restrain her. And that is why he was prepared to maintain a plea to manslaughter.
Nutt's defence that Dawn was attacking him is immediately put under doubt when he walks into the courtroom.
Nutt is an imposing physical person, and we know that Dawn was only 5 foot tall and very slight build. So this is an individual who enjoys and likes to impose his dominance over women. And he was never going to argue that she overpowered him or she threatened him because of the difference in stature. He says that he didn't mean to kill her, but he would say that the size of the man to cause physical injury to her and then to apply such pressure on her throat to kill her, that there would be an intent to murder.
Nutt's attitude in the dock does little to endear him to the jury.
During the trial, Nutt seemed disinterested, which, given the gravity and detail of the horrific crime, is disgraceful.
He appears cool, calm and collected, and you think, how can a person do this? Appear in the dock, know they're facing a life sentence, and just act so nonchalant about it.
The prosecution revealed to the jury what they claim to be Nutt's web of lies, starting with the honeymoon to Skegness.
Because his story was that they'd gone off for the honeymoon in the caravan, and they'd spent a couple of nights in the lay-by where they had a good time watching DVDs and things like that. The police obviously took very thorough steps to investigate everything that Thomas said. And one of the things that raised a big question mark was whether Dawn had actually gone to Skegness.
The morning after the wedding, Thomas had been outside the house when a passerby stopped to chat.
A neighbour asked about Dawn because Thomas was up quite early, and he said, oh, she's in bed with a hangover. She's had too much to drink last night.
But the prosecution suggests that Dawn Walker was not a big drinker and had consumed little alcohol at her wedding reception the previous night.
Neighbours had noticed things in the family home and the area that weren't quite right, in terms of the curtains remaining closed at the house, washing remaining on the line. Dawn would always leave the curtains open or take the washing in before they went out.
The evidence from neighbours was that Dawn was the early wake-up person. She got up early, she got up and did things around the house. But on that occasion, she didn't.
The prosecution highlight a further anomaly on the return from the honeymoon.
When Thomas Nutt got back, acquiring the assistance of a neighbour to help him park up the caravan, which was an activity that Dawn would usually do. Even before Thomas Nutt had reported a missing, neighbours and noted things that weren't quite right.
The jury hears how police had scrutinised ANPR cameras along the route the couple would have taken to Skegness.
The CCTV showed that when he left the house, Thomas was clearly in view. There was no sign of Dawn. She wasn't in the passenger seat, and he actually put things on that seat, and she wasn't anywhere to be seen. And on the trip down to Skegness, various cameras, CCTV cameras, showed there was nobody in the passenger seat. So the police did a thorough investigation of CCTV down to Skegness, and every bit of evidence from CCTV showed that Dawn was not in the car. So she wasn't visible on the way down to Skegness, and on the return journey from Skegness, there were other camera shots, CCTV shots, which also showed no Dawn.
Despite Nutt's defence that Dawn's death was an accident, when they returned home from their honeymoon on the 31st of October, the evidence dictates otherwise.
The last person to see Dawn was her maid of honour after the wedding celebration in the pub, and eventually the taxi driver. And beyond that, the only person who claimed to have seen Dawn was Thomas Nutt. Everything about her going to Skegness and things that would supposedly happened were untrue. Dawn had not gone to Skegness. He killed her on the night of the wedding.
Is standing trial, accused of the murder of his new wife, Dawn Walker. The prosecution are claiming that he killed her on their wedding night.
We know Dawn was last seen on CCTV of showing her and Thomas Nutt arriving home after their wedding. This was just after midnight, and she could be seen on the CCTV getting out of a taxi and arriving home. So we knew she'd arrived home, but she was not seen again after that.
But Thomas Nutt maintains that he and Dawn enjoyed their honeymoon together, and that while away, Dawn was even messaging her daughters.
There's an expectation that he goes on honeymoon, and there's also an expectation that she will want to speak to family and friends. We know that when he was in the caravan, that he communicated purporting to be Dawn to a daughter. Again, all knowing that he'd already killed her mother. We know that on the 30th of October, he again, purporting to be Dawn, messaged and contacted the daughter, asking to meet up in Brighouse the following day. again, keeping that pretense up that she's alive.
Thomas Nutt has said he'd killed Dawn on the 30th, but she had not actually been seen since the night of her wedding. He probably said that he'd killed her on the 30th because it was less time, and also he's not been preventing a lawful burial for as long as he would have been had he fessed up to killing her on the 27th.
Having killed her on the night of the wedding, Nutt goes ahead with their planned 3-day honeymoon to Skegness.
Because it's a spontaneous act, he's now thinking, what do I do? And from that moment on, he's then now got to deal with the fact that he's a newly married man. There's an expectation that he goes on honeymoon. How does he explain her absence? And indeed, if he has to speak to the police and undergo scrutiny, how will that bear out? What will he say? All the while, he's having to react and think on the spot, which is why I believe he went to the caravan in Skegness to give himself some thinking time.
But instead of parking up in a caravan park, Nutt took the safer option of an isolated lay-by.
I believe the motive for that is it's better to take to a lay-by than a concentrated campsite where there's more people going to sort of find out that actually she wasn't with you.
On his return from the honeymoon, and having bought some thinking time, Nutt reports his wife missing.
It's understood that when he reported her missing, Dawn's body was still in the house.
He says that he put her in a cupboard in the kitchen. Bodies decompose according to the temperature in the environment that they're left, and also what they're left in, whether it's, you know, if it's in mud, grass, where you've got animals, that can then obviously affect the body. But what we believe is that Dawn was in the house, so she was protected from the elements.
The evidence clearly pointed to the fact that the body of Dawn had been hid in a cupboard until Thomas came back from Skegness. And it was only following his return, when the issues of her going missing became apparent, that he perhaps panicked and he decided to hide the body. And that's when he stuffed her body into the suitcase and pushed it over his garden in the Mac field.
But the most damning evidence yet is CCTV, retrieved from Thomas and Dawn's own home on the day he reported her missing.
CCTV was obtained, which showed Nutt taking a heavy object, believed to be a suitcase with wheels. We now believe that had Dawn's body inside, and dragging the suitcase out of the back garden. Nutt is an imposing character and is an imposing frame. Even for his size, to drag a body in a suitcase would have taken great strength and great effort. So the deposition site of the body would always going to be nearby.
And the prosecution suggests that the place selected to leave Dawn's body was chosen by Nutt in order to avoid detection.
When you're dragging such a heavy object, and it's in an unnatural way down a street or across a field, the chances of you being exposed or seen by a dog walker or a neighbour or a member of the community as being out of the ordinary is that bit greater. Because when he had dragged the body to the deposition site, he'd already reported Dawn missing.
There is a further revelation in the time of day this footage was filmed.
CCTV captured him returning just in time for an officer to speak with him about Dawn's missing person case. The police officer noted that Thomas Nutt was sweating at the time. Thomas Nutt told the officer that he had been to the shop. It was after the PC left that Thomas Nutt was then seen on CCTV going back into his garden to conceal the marks left by the suitcase. It was broad daylight that Thomas Nutt decided to move Dawn's body and put it in an area behind the couple's home.
The defence raised questions as to why Nutt would take such a risk, but the prosecution have a compelling theory.
So after Thomas Nutt had reported Dawn missing, he was made aware that a visit would be made by an officer, and it was then that he began to panic that they would discover Dawn's body. Thomas Nutt got rid of her body because he knew the police were going to search his house.
It is Dawn Walker's post-mortem results that expose the most disturbing details in the case against Thomas Nutt.
Dawn had suffered significant injuries before and after her death. Before death, she had received injuries to her face, including a laceration and bruising.
Dawn had been strangled. The damage to the neck had been caused with considerable force.
After her death, she'd received injuries to her ribs, including fractures and breaks, which was significant as they suggested that she had been put into the suitcase after her death.
She was a 5-foot lady, and he broke her legs to get her into that suitcase, which showed a complete disrespect for his wife, who he'd murdered or killed, as he would say, accidentally.
So there will have been rigor mortis from Dawn, which explains why Nutt had to break her legs and such like to squeeze her into the suitcase, because her body would have been stiff, but she suffered immensely by the sounds of it.
With all the details of the investigation now laid before the court, it is down to the jury to decide if Thomas Nutt is guilty of murder or the lesser charge of manslaughter.
It is very difficult to determine what goes through the mind of a person when they are attacking somebody else. Was he intending to kill? Was he wanting to harm her in such a way that she would never recover? Was he just a violent person who lost his temper? Was he a narcissist who couldn't tolerate being challenged? Was he a psychopath? Who knows what was in his mind? Who knows what drove him?
The jury was sent out on the 10th of August, shortly after 10 a.m, and returned at 2:30. They'd unanimously reached a verdict of guilty for murder.
He sat at the back of the court listening to everything, and then when he was found guilty, it said an expletive to the judge and showed absolutely no remorse whatsoever. The judge summed up to say that he was a bully and that he was a threat to women, and that he'd used his physicality to impose his will on women.
The West Yorkshire man who killed his wife on their wedding night and stuffed her body into a suitcase has been jailed for life. A warning: you may find the following video distressing. Police have released CCTV footage showing 46-year-old Thomas Nutt with the suitcase before he dumped Dawn Walker's body in bushes behind their home in Lightcliffe near Halifax. Nutt had strangled the 52-year-old just hours after they were married.
Thomas Nutt was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years, less time spent on remand in custody. He was told by the judge that he would spend 21 years behind bars before going before the parole board, who will determine whether he is safe to be released. The judge said Dawn had been subjected to domestic violence throughout the course of their relationship.
Everything was a fabrication, and the whole picture became clear. That Thomas was an inveterate liar. He was somebody who was totally intent on protecting himself, having killed Dawn, and kept it up until, in fact, the last minute, until, of course, he was exposed as a liar and a murderer.
The way this case played out was one of the worst cases of domestic violence that I've seen in my career. In particular, the way that Thomas Nutt treated his wife after she died, his disregard for her and her dignity overplayed anything else. He had no compassion and no remorse for what he'd done.
What I would do is to urge anyone who was listening to Dawn's story and other countless victims of abuse to come forward, report to the police. You are not alone. There is a wealth of support out there for you.
The court heard statements from both Dawn's daughter and her sister. Dawn's daughter said she lost a part of her when she got the call saying that her mum's body had been discovered. She described Dawn as a beautiful soul and said she had lost her greatest support.